Welcome to my review of Steve Jobs, directed by Danny Boyle, a biodrama centered on legendary visionary Steve Jobs during his three iconic product launches in the years of 1984, 1988, and 1998. So it's been a while since I've seen a Danny Boyle film. I never did get around to seeing Trance, but I did see 127 Hours, which was one of my favorite films of 2010. And speaking of 2010, Danny Boyle also teamed up with Aaron Sorkin, who you might know for writing the screenplay for Moneyball, as well as being the creator and writer of The Newsroom that plays on HBO. And he's also known for writing one of my other favorite films of 2010, The Social Network. And right from the very beginning of the film, you can really feel Aaron Sorkin's presence in the script, especially in the dialogue, because it has this very swift, very energetic, rhythmic punch to it. The writing in this film is masterfully crafted, and in terms of just the overall screenplay, this is one of the best films that I've seen all year long. Now, one thing that I have heard people mention while talking about this film is how this film plays out. A lot of people have been saying that this film plays out like a stage play. And indeed it does. There are three acts in the film. One is in 1984, where Steve Jobs is unveiling the first Macintosh. One is in 1988, where he is unveiling the next box. And in 1998, where he is unveiling the first iMac. However, and this is something that may have been a disappointment for some, while this will be a disappointment for some, and that is you never do see any of the presentations during these segments. So in other words, it's just the backstage drama. Personally, I wouldn't have minded seeing the presentations included in the film, but at the same time, I definitely understand why they were not present in the film, and that's simply because, hell, they're on the internet, you can look them up, see the real Steve Jobs, see the real presentations, and get that. And plus, let's face it, the most interesting things are not the things that you see on stage, but it's the stuff that goes on behind the stage. While watching this film, it really reminded me of a film that came out last year, and that is Birdman, because that film showcased what goes on behind the curtain. So when I said that this film showcases what goes on behind the stage, I wasn't speaking metaphorically. Each act in the film takes place in an auditorium, and it all plays out in real time, or at least it seems as if it does, and it all leads up to, again, an unveiling of a new Apple product or a new Next product. And leading up to these off-screen presentations, we get to see the drama between Steve Jobs and Chris and Brennan, who keeps on trying to get him to pay for child support, yet he repeatedly denies that he is the biological father of their daughter Lisa. You also have the drama between Steve and John Sculley, the CEO of Apple in the 1980s, and Steve Jobs being fired in the 1980s as well. And then of course you have the confrontations between Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who is known for being one of the allegedly many people Steve Jobs was a complete shithead to. And just in case you do not know, Steve Wozniak was the creator of the Apple I, and he was the co-founder of Apple along with Steve Jobs. It's pretty common knowledge now that Steve Jobs was a bit of a hothead. He wasn't the nicest guy, and he wasn't even the most gifted person in the room. However, he was a true visionary, and he knew how to push people to greatness. He's kind of like Terrence Fletcher from Whiplash.
Why do you suppose I just hurled a chair at your head, Neiman?
One thing that I definitely need to mention, and this is something that actually might turn off a few people as they're watching the film. As for me, it didn't really bother me that much, but it is something that I did definitely notice, and that is sometimes when two characters are interacting with one another, the conversation, it will start out moderately quiet, but then it will build to something very, very nasty, and they'll just start yelling at one another. It's a bit of a trend in the movie, but it also makes for some extraordinary scenes, and I kind of see it as the spectacle for this film. I know that doesn't make much sense, but it is. It's kind of like the action set pieces in an action film. And it's in these scenes you get to see some absolutely phenomenal performances, really by everyone. For starters, Seth Rogen as Steve Wozniak. When he first appeared on screen, I was like, okay, that's Seth Rogen, but there came a point where I actually forgot I was watching Seth Rogen. And that's saying a lot, because usually when I watch Seth Rogen, I'm very much aware that I'm watching Seth Rogen. This time, not so much. No, he was actually great in this movie. There's also Jeff Daniels, who gives the best performance I've seen from him probably ever. He's quite incredible in this movie, especially in this one scene in the second act where it just gets quite explosive. Kate Winslet is pretty unrecognizable, as well as being pretty amazing as Joanna Hoffman, who is Steve Jobs' assistant, and she kind of serves as the conscience of Steve Jobs. And then last but certainly not least, we have Michael Fassbender as Steve Jobs, who looks absolutely nothing like him, doesn't talk like him, doesn't even really act like him from what I can see, but is brilliant in the film anyway. The way I see biopics based on true stories, inspired by true events, or however the hell you want to paint it, it's all fiction. And this movie is certainly no exception, and I was listening to a podcast and they brought up how Steve Jobs and Michael Fassbender, in terms of likeness, have absolutely nothing in common. And of course I agree with that, as I've already stated. But they brought up how, after hearing all of these less than flattering stories of Steve Jobs, what happens behind the scenes, you kind of get this image in your head, and that image is, of course, Michael Fassbender, because no one plays a cold-hearted bastard better than Michael Fassbender. This is yet again another magnificent performance by Michael Fassbender, who has become one of my favorite actors as of recently. And although I would have loved to have seen Christian Bale's take on Steve Jobs, because one, he kind of looks a little bit more like him, and two, he did give us that one incredible rant on the Terminator set, which is just freaking gold. Michael Fassbender, he really is incredible on this. Is it my favorite performance of the year? It's hard to say, but it is one of my favorite performances of the year. As for any closing statements, what's really the heart of the film, surprisingly, is the relationship between Steve Jobs and his daughter Lisa. And I found it to be beautiful, a little sentimental, without it being cheesy whatsoever, and that was probably my favorite aspect to the film. And one last thing that I want to praise this film for is that there's no unveiling of the iPad or the iPhone, because, I don't know, I just feel like that would have been too easy, been kind of gimmicky. At the very most, there are background references to that technology, which is how I think it should have been. Overall, Steve Jobs is a masterfully crafted piece of work, whether you're talking about the direction, the writing, the acting, it's all there, it's firing on all cylinders, and it is quite impressive. I'm going to give Steve Jobs a moderate 4.5 out of 5. I am finished with my review, but one thing I have to mention before I end this video is that when I saw this movie today at a 4 o'clock screening, there were only 5 people, including myself, in the entire theater. And I think that's kind of unfortunate. Needless to say, this is a great movie. It deserves your attention. It deserves to be seen. So if you had the chance, do check this movie out. It is totally worth your time. If you're somebody who has seen this film, do let me know your thoughts on it. And if you're somebody who has a favorite Apple product, let me know that as well. Mine would be the MacBook Pro. That's what I'm using right now to power my microphone. And a quick shout out to the iPod Nano, the first generation. I got it when I was in 8th grade, which was almost 10 years ago. It's a 4 gigabyte, which doesn't hold jack shit, but it was something kind of cool for the time. And now I have an iPod Touch, which is like 64 gigabyte, and that barely holds what I need. So anyway, as always, I'm Colin Kirkland, and thank you so much for watching.